Hey, welcome to the Bassmaster Studios. Tommy Sanders here, and of course, we're all very much anticipating, along with you, the ESPN2 coverage of the 50th Academy Sports and Outdoors Bassmaster Classic presented by Hook from Lake Guntersville, a fantastic tournament. And of course, that coverage is coming up on ESPN2 on April 5th, the 12th, and the 19th. And in anticipation of that, what we're going to do, we're going to take another time travel trip today. And my fellow time traveler here is, of course, the great Mark Zona. Z, great to have you with us here today. I'm going to let you introduce the most important time traveler.
You know, Tommy, what's interesting about our producer, Mike McInnes, called me and he said, tell me about a classic that meant something to you in some way, shape, or form. So I rattled off, I think, probably 30 different classics. I said, I don't know. One of them was Larry Nixon on the Ohio River. One of them was Rick Clunn on the James River. Kevin Van Dam in Pittsburgh. And I landed on Jay Yelas on Lay Lake. And Mike said, well, hold on. Why? I want to know why. And I said, gosh, man. I said, there's been classics won shallow. Summertime classics that were won shallow. And this was actually right before I started working with you, Tommy Sanders. And I said, this tournament was won shallow in a spot. With that being said, we're going to bring in that classic champion, Jay Yelas. Jay, thanks for joining.
Hey, guys. I'm thrilled to be joining you today. And, yeah, that was a great memory and a lot of fun back then. So that was one of the summertime classics that we used to enjoy fishing there and on Lay Lake in Alabama. And just a thrill for me. It still is to this day. A lot of folks still come up to me and talk about it all the time.
July 25th, well, as we watch the footage now, there's some sort of juvenile character, a guy who just got his high school diploma.
Tommy, it's your son.
Took a job in TV
son.
the next day. Took a job in TV. Well, what a weird-looking sight that is. But there's the star right there. There's our playing field, Lay Lake. 48 miles from the Logan Martin Dam all the way down to the Lay Dam. But, Jay, that first couple of miles is most important, right?
Yeah, you know, this was the first and only time I believe that a classic was won in a tail race. And I was fishing right below Logan Martin Dam, and it was a late July tournament. That right there, you're looking at that they would turn the turbines on every day about 10 a.m., and the water level would rise about 3 feet, and those bass would pull up under these little undercut banks that were, 2 to 4 feet of water, and they were basically dry when the water was off. When they turned the water on, the water rose, the fish flooded up shallow right to the bank. There was some heavy wood, big logs and trees and stuff in there, rock and undercut mud banks, and I was just pitching a jig right up there shallow. And boy, the big ones were in there that year.
Jay, real quick, this was not a 2-mile stretch. This was a 30 to 50-yard stretch when that water would start moving.
Yeah, that's right, Z. It was really the last good cover as you're heading up Lay Lake, heading up the river towards Logan Martin Dam. It was the last good cover before you hit the dam. And I was probably 500 yards below the dam, but it was the last good cover before the dam. And so those fish, they would, it was a perfect ambush spot. They would migrate up, I believe, up that river channel shoreline until they got to that spot, and they kind of held right there, and they'd wait for shad or whatever food would come drifting to them with that current when that water turned on. And yeah, it was a dream scenario for me because every afternoon Alabama Power would turn off that water. And so the water would drop 3 feet, the fish would pull out, and the spot was basically saved for me until the next day of fishing when they turned the water back on at 10 a.m. It was a perfect storm for a classic victory.
Explain, number one, you look like Pat Riley back in the day looking at this footage right here.
He looks the same as he does today.
Really
he hasn't aged a day.
Real quick, explain what you just said. We're in a day now of spectators and pressure on spots, not in just classics, just in tournaments. Explain what you mean by your spot was safe until the next day.
Well, right. Even back then, Z, there was a lot of spectators. I probably had, 50 to 70 spectator boats following me up Lay Lake each day to that spot. But we have to head to weigh in about 2 o'clock each afternoon to make the run back down there to the boat ramp. And, a lot of times you just never know who's fishing that afternoon or that evening while you're gone to the weigh-in. And it was not a concern of mine in this tournament, though, because when that water turned off, that water dropped about 3 feet, and it was very hazardous area also, with all the rock piles and boating hazards that were exposed at low water. So it was really even hard to get to the place I was catching them when the water was turned off, just because it was so rocky and hazardous getting there. So it was really the spot was like reserved until the next day when the water was turned back on. It was, and the other factor, that's a good map there. That's exactly where I was fishing. The other factor, there were some other boats fishing up that river, but they were the boat traffic of spectator boats running up and down the river. The wake caused by those boats would muddy up the banks that those guys were fishing in the afternoon. And I didn't have that problem where I was at. I was so far up river that it was too hazardous to go running up beyond where I was fishing with the boat, because you might hit a rock or something. So that kept my water from getting muddy from boat wakes. Everybody was idling up in that area.
Jay, we're watching footage right now, of course, from day number 2. We didn't have a camera on you on day number 1. You had 18-9 on day number 1, though. That was a huge lead for that tournament right there. How confident did you feel going into day number 2?
Oh, I really liked the spot because the good fish were there, Tommy, and it was the perfect scenario for a tournament victory. Just, and there were big fish were on that spot, and what I liked about it was back then B.A.S.S would give us a week to practice for the Classic a month prior. So then we'd fish for a week, then it would go off limits, and then we'd have the tournament, I believe, with 1 day of practice before competition. And that's a big spotted bass that I caught up there. There were some good spots on that bank, as well as largemouth. Yeah, that was a nice one. So, but what I was getting at is, when I was there a month prior pre-fishing, I didn't ever caught a bass on that spot, but I caught a bunch of great big stripers, and the stripers were in there, and the bunch of threadfin shad, and so when we had the one practice day prior to the actual competition, I had to go check that spot.
I'm supposed to win the Bassmaster Classic. Oh my goodness. I'm supposed to win the Bassmaster Classic when they do stuff like that to me. Oh, that's just laughable. It's so ridiculous.
This is the reason I picked this Classic, Jay. In all honesty, I'll shut my mouth right now. Watch this fish catch for everybody that has never seen this.
That's the most dramatic catch I've ever had, really.
I got one. Oh, that can't be a bass. Oh yeah, it can be a big one too.
I remember sitting at home. I remember, Jay, this is true. I remember sitting at home watching this footage going, they edited that. There's no way he caught that.
It was real. That was real time.
Come here. Oh.
Yeah, that fish could have jumped off right there. It was just meant to be, that pontoon boat ran over that spot I was fishing. It's only about 4 feet deep.
Ran on plane 10 feet from where this fish was at. I said, it'll take an act of God to make
10 feet.
One bite in there now.
And Jay Yelas, again, the big fish. Well, 35-2 would be along with that big one for a 9-pound lead there as you go into the final day, Jay. I mean, as good as you felt on day number 1, you had to feel terrific after day number 2.
I did, and it was when that pontoon boat ran over that spot, and you probably heard me say, I said to the cameraman it would take an act of God to catch one now, and I threw out there and caught the biggest fish of the whole tournament. I figured, well, it's just meant to be, and it's part of God's plan for me to win this tournament. And sure enough, the next day I caught a decent bag and pulled it off. But it was one unique thing about that event was the fact that, and I don't know that this has ever happened before or since, Tommy and Z, was that I caught the big bass every day of that tournament, and I don't think it's not an official record on my account, but I don't think that's ever happened before or since then. So that was pretty special. There were so many big largemouth on that spot that they just kept coming every day and made it easy.
I'm going to actually ask you 2 questions, very fishing related, tail race related. We've covered a few. Looking at Jerry right there. It's amazing to watch this because I remember watching this exact tournament.
What we're talking about, and when there is no current, and this is not necessarily your spot. This is just a spot on a river, and here's what happens: no current. The fish are, they're kind of scattered out, very lethargic, not interested in anything, and they probably stay that way. And then all at once, the current kicks on. You see them kind of line up there. They might not do that exactly on your spot, Jay, but that is what happens, isn't it?
That's exactly what happens.
There's some eddies, incidentally.
Not only the predators, but also the bait fish, the shad, also move to those eddies when the current turns on. And so the bait fish get in a real well-defined area. It makes it easy for the bass to catch them.
Well, you're headed up the lake right here.
The two questions I had looking at Jerry, and that's kind of was really the start of animation, here at JM Associates, was number one, where do you think those bass were when there was no current being run, when that current was not being generated? The other one was, of all the tournaments that we have covered, we got to see Davey Height win it, on Pickwick, doing not the same technique, but relying on them to generate power. Were you at all worried, gosh, what if they don't run water on day 3?
Oh, yeah. That's a great point, because if they don't turn the water on, I did catch one the last day. In fact, this fish, right, that wasn't the one, but I did catch one the final morning before the water turned on. But if they don't turn that water on, I probably don't win that tournament. And normally on Sunday, they don't run the water in the summertime on those lakes. They do it to generate power, and I guess they don't need as much power on the weekends, but they did generate all 3 days of the tournament, which was a huge blessing to me. But to answer your first question, those fish were not there where I was catching them when the water was off, though it was like a foot or two deep and clear, and there were some back behind the boat. There were some deep little depressions in the middle of the river. I'm sure that those fish retreated to those areas when the water was off, and then when the water turned on, they actually swam maybe 30 to 50 yards up to the bank where they were catchable. And Jerry's explanation of those eddies, the current eddies, when confining all the bait and the bass in those little areas out of the main current, that's exactly what happens, and it makes it easy for the bass to feed. It's like instead of having food scattered all over a table, you got your food all right there in a bowl, and it's a lot easier to eat it when it's all in one spot.
Jay, looking at this footage from then to now, using a 5/8 ounce jig, correct? Monofilament line, no shallow water anchors. Watching this footage, are you like, man, if I had the weapons that we have now, I really would have.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I had to run those batteries awfully hard to to fish in that current. And right at the end of every day, my batteries would start dying too. But it would have been really nice to have power poles back then, or to have the Garmin Panoptix Live Scope to look for fish in that situation. But it was a different game back then. 2002. That's 18 years ago, and it was, there was a lot more fishing what you see and that sort of thing than you have these days. But yeah, it was there. There's the boats heading back to weigh in, running back down Lay Lake.
Could you catch them on anything else besides a jig?
Yeah. You probably, I did pitch around some little soft plastics and stuff too, but when bass are biting a jig, see, that's one thing I've learned over my career. If they will bite a jig, you better throw it, because you're going to catch the right quality fish on it, and that's it. I think that's still true today. They don't bite a jig as often as they used to, but boy, when I love a good jig bite, nothing better.
Jay, one thing I don't know if this made it. We've sort of cut down the show for time reasons here, but you did a good explanation of, speaking of that jig, how you were fishing this. It wasn't like a conventional way of doing it. You were drifting it, and you almost likened it to fishing out in the rivers in Oregon, fishing for other species.
Right. Yeah, I do a lot of current fishing for other species out here, but we like steelhead and whatever. But so I'm very comfortable fishing in the current, grew up fishing in a lot of current, and that situation, I was using a 5/8 ounce jig with a small, plastic craw trailer on the back, and you want to jig with a super heavy weed guard in that situation. If you're fishing current and wood, you'll hang up almost every cast with a light weed guard. So I was using a real heavy weed guard, and just kind of, that bait wouldn't really sit still. You just have to, I was hopping it along the bottom. I was not swimming it. I was fishing it on the bottom of the lake. But when you'd hop it, your line would drift, and you'd be moving the jig at a faster pace than you would if you were fishing it slowly on a lake where there's no current. And you just kind of keep up with it as it would drift, and it would stop on the bottom, but it would drift at times depending on how hard the current was running. But where I was trying to pitch it was in those little eddies out of the main current, and in those spots it would settle down in the bottom a little bit better. But if you in that heavy current, if you got the jig right in the current, it would move with the, I don't know, you probably had a 4 mile an hour current. It was definitely walking speed or faster.
Well, some great scenes of a day I'm sure you will never forget there, that moment at the weigh-in where you were crowned the world champion, and just all the memories that you have. From then until now, I'm sure it's still a great source of happiness.
That was a great classic, and it has been a great thrill. It's been the greatest achievement of my bass fishing career in 30 plus years of doing it. And a couple other things about that tournament. The nation was just coming off of the 9/11 debacle the fall before, and this was the first classic after that. I think it really brought people together. I remember us having a full house there in Birmingham for the weigh-in on the final day, and there was just a lot of fanfare. And Birmingham's the epicenter of bass fishing in the universe, and so always great crowds and great folks coming out there. And those summer classics were a lot of fun.
Jay, thank you so much for spending time with me and Z and all your fans and reliving, like Z said, one of everyone's favorite classics. The great Jay Yelas. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.